Things took a dark turn after 20 days of blistering heat. For an entire day and night, the crowd huddled at the store entrance was actually cheering for the storm. They threw themselves into the downpour, desperate to wash away the weeks of grime. I stepped out, gripping my bags of coffee and pork, scowling at the clouds. My problem wasn't a lack of gratitude for the cool air. Those triple-digit days felt like a slow death. But this rain triggered a deep, primal terror that most people couldn't understand. The trauma started 3 years ago on one specific rainy night when my car lost its grip and plummeted into a dark lake. I spiraled into that freezing abyss, staring straight into the eyes of my own end. If luck hadn't pulled me out that night, I'd be a ghost. Now water is nothing but a jagged psychological scar. Even the sound of a drizzle makes my skin crawl. I checked my phone to see what the sky had in store for us. The forecast promised the heat was finally breaking. That suffocating 110-degree torture was fading away. Clouds were taking over, dropping us to a much better 90 degrees. But it came with a catch: relentless, non-stop rain. I let out a heavy breath and ducked back inside the supermarket. I had to stock up now. The heat had kept me from hoarding supplies, and there was no way I was stepping outside once the deluge really started. I decided right then to turn my place into a fortress. I loaded up so I wouldn't have to leave for a week, grabbing 10 boxes of Essentials chicken wings, 3 bags of dumplings, and 4 fresh meals. I even threw in some sweet rice balls, anything that felt like comfort food. I added a massive bag of produce starches and instant ramen, knowing I could stretch this to a month if the world ended. Once I was done, I hailed a cab back to my mid-tier apartment complex. My place is pretty compact, just about 1,000 square feet on the 3rd floor. The second I hauled my haul inside, the sky turned violent, hammering the glass with a terrifying rhythm. It sounded like the windows were about to burst. Outside, the entire city dissolved into a murky, colorless void. The people who were celebrating earlier had definitely scrambled for cover by now. Everyone was hunkered down, so I yanked the drapes shut and dialed my parents' house. They live way out in the rural mountain country, where a storm like this could be a death sentence. "Lynn, you have to stay safe. This storm is getting worse by the minute," my father warned, his voice heavy with worry. He told me he hadn't seen a flood like this in decades. "I know, Dad, but you two are the ones who need to stay inside. Please stay away from the fields. I'm locked in tight, so just worry about yourselves," I urged him. My father just kept repeating the same warning. Fine, but if your building starts taking on water, you get home immediately. Head for high ground. Lynn, you hear me? Get to the roof if you have to." "Thanks, Dad." He knew my history with the water. I faked a reassuring tone and promised him I understood the stakes. I distracted myself with some games, took a hot shower, and eventually fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. I woke up to a nightmare of screaming winds and a sky that refused to stop falling. The gale was whipping the rain into a frenzy across the city. The droplets hit the glass like hurled stones, a brutal assault that showed no sign of breaking. I checked my weather app, and it claimed the rain wasn't supposed to start until tonight. Why was the world already drowning? I yanked the curtains back to witness the total chaos outside. A thick wall of mist had swallowed the courtyard, and the lights from the building across the street were nothing but faint, dying flickers. Just then, the building management blasted an emergency alert to our community group chat. "Attention everyone. The weather service has issued a red alert. Bolt your doors and stay away from the windows to avoid injury." A red alert meant things were turning critical, with over 100 millimeters of rain expected in a 3-hour window. The city was likely in full emergency mode, but in the group chat, people were still treating it like a game. Some idiots were still joking around, acting like they were invincible. "Man, this is a total rush. Who wants to go for a romantic walk in the flood, haha?" I just watched the messages scroll by, feeling a pit in my stomach. It wasn't until the next day, as the deluge kept hammering down like a sinking ship, that the jokes finally died. "This is getting scary. It hasn't let up for 48 hours straight. The bottom level of the parking garage is submerged. If your car is on level 3, move it now or you'll lose it. The streets are gone. If this doesn't stop soon, we're all going to run out of food in here." I tuned out the chatter. I was obsessed with the glass only relaxing once I'd double-checked the seals. Since I'd been hoarding supplies for weeks, my next meal was the last thing on my mind. I couldn't wrap my head around this deluge. 7 days straight. Was this actually happening? Every single morning was a carbon copy of the last. The sky was still falling, showing no mercy. The downpour hadn't lost an ounce of power. We were under a code red alert. I turned back to the glass. The panes were actually vibrating from the force. Droplets were already weeping past the heavy-duty weather stripping. Seeing that breach in my armor sent me into a tailspin. Mom and Dad wouldn't stop blowing up my phone. I lied and said I had things under control. But I knew better. For 7 days, the world stayed submerged. Yuching looked like a combat zone, but it wasn't just my zip code. I started doom scrolling for any real info. It was global Europe, Southeast Asia, North America. The entire planet was being hammered by an endless wall of water. This wasn't just a storm. I started looking into the history of how civilizations and species vanish. I read about the Great Dying, how Earth once suffered a 2 million-year storm that paved the way for the dinosaurs. As my fear of the rising tide reached a fever pitch, my thoughts began to spiral until I made a bone-chilling connection to that ancient disaster. I compared our crisis to that 2 million-year flood. On the neighborhood app, people were desperate trading jewelry for potatoes. I was sitting pretty on a mountain of groceries and a freezer full of steak since I'd barely eaten. I could survive another week easily, but the pantry wasn't the monster I was afraid of. One more week of this and the city would die. I checked the street trying to gauge the depth. Everything was a gray smear. I couldn't see the road, let alone the private lake in our courtyard. Suddenly, a notification from building management shattered the silence on my phone. They were ordering everyone on the ground floor to evacuate their belongings to higher levels immediately. The lobby was flooding and the water was climbing fast. The group chat went dead silent as reality set in. If the first floor was going under, that meant the underground parking deck was already a watery tomb. My Benz was probably an aquarium by now. That familiar, suffocating panic started clawing at my throat again. We're not in a flood zone, but the city center was turning into a lake. It defied logic, yet it happened. I kept thinking, this is impossible. But the sky didn't care about logic. It just kept pouring. After a week of this, nowhere was safe. I tried calling 911, but the line was completely dead. Total anarchy was setting in with rumors that Dongyao was gone and the main levee was about to snap. While everyone else was scared, I was paralyzed. My deep-seated fear of water made this my personal hell. I was terrified the tide would hit my third-floor unit and trap me like a rat in a cage. After that midnight warning, the idea of peace felt like a dream from another life. My supplies were fine, but the rising water was a death sentence. Then my father's old advice echoed, go up, get to the roof. Maybe it was my old trauma talking, but I felt like climbing was my only hope. The roof was my only fortress. Our building was 31 stories tall. I raced for the elevator to reach the summit. I scanned the 6 units on the top floor. 5 had names on the doors, but 1 sat empty. That vacant apartment had a massive steel security door, but no signs of any recent construction work. I tried the handle, putting my whole weight into it, but it was useless. The place was bolted shut. Defeated and desperate, I retreated to my floor, but sleep was the last thing I could find that night. My brain wouldn't turn off. I kept seeing myself sinking into the black, silent depths of the flood. I dreamed of being dragged away by a violent current, until I jolted awake at 7 in the morning. The drumming had stopped. Under a leaden gray sky, I scrambled to the window, my heart racing with hope. I peered out at the wreckage. A crowd had already gathered near one of the neighbors' units. The entire complex was a lake. Our artificial pond had swallowed the courtyard hours ago. People from the first floor were frantically bailing out their living rooms, their screams of frustration echoing through the air. The community group chat was a total war zone, with everyone acting like they'd just survived the end of the world. Neighbors waded through the receding murk for scraps, thinking the nightmare had ended. I didn't move. The local broadcast claimed the deluge had broken, shifting focus to body recovery and rescue. I exhaled a shaky breath, but my relief died as the global headlines started rolling in. Arid regions that hadn't seen rain in decades were suddenly being erased by vertical oceans. Scrolling through the chaos, my pulse spiked. India was drowning under a 100-year storm. Slums were swallowed whole, and the New York subway had become an underwater tomb. That transit disaster was the single deadliest event the city had seen in 30 years. A chilling report surfaced from an Antarctic research post, Wilkes Land, was being pulverized by hailstones. For 3 days straight, nature had been screaming. Every news alert felt like an apocalyptic omen. I glanced back at the window. The sky was a haunting, featureless void of white. I wondered if the sky was actually empty or just reloading. By dusk, life pretended to reset. The local market's neon flickered back to life, and the taps finally ran with fresh water. The rain stayed away, but the clouds remained a bruised charcoal when my mother's call came. Trauma had me spiraling, convinced that the 2 million-year storm of prehistory was making a comeback. Survival instincts finally overrode my paralysis. I grabbed my boots and charged toward the grocery store. The aisles were packed mostly with kids playing as if the world wasn't on the brink. Everyone else was buying snacks. I was preparing for a siege. I started clearing the shelves. I dumped dozens of bags of frozen poultry and wings into my cart without hesitation. 50 packs of meat, 30 crates of crackers, 20 loaves, and an arsenal of survival blades. I hoarded every battery charger and portable power bank the electronics section had left. The owner stared at me like I was a lunatic, but I just kept hauling my haul. I dragged the stash home head down. With strict rationing, I could hold out for months. I had a massive sack of rice, and if the grid held, I'd survive. But I wasn't done. I hit the pharmacy next, buying out their entire stock of antibiotics and emergency fever meds. If sickness came for me in the dark, I needed to be my own doctor. Even with a fortress of food, a gnawing sense of vulnerability remained in my gut. Level 3 was a drowning height. I pulled up the resident chat to find a way out. There was a ghost neighbor, a guy who owned a unit but lived 1,000 miles away. His place on the 31st floor, unit 3102, sat empty and waiting for a tenant. He'd been desperate for a renter. I messaged him saying I'd found the perfect candidate. I negotiated a 200 UN finder's fee, locking in the 1,500 a month rate immediately. He demanded a 3-month deposit and told me to get the keys from the building manager. The deal closed in minutes. I grabbed the keys and began the frantic relocation. One load at a time, I hauled my entire life up those 31 flights of stairs. Neighbors asked questions, so I lied and said I was a paid mover. By 9 p.m., I was in. Every muscle screamed in agony, but I forced myself to bolt every lock and seal every window. Perched on the 31st floor, surrounded by my mountain of gear, I finally felt untouchable. I let out a single exhausted sigh of relief. And then the sky broke. A violent, crushing wall of water slammed into the city of Flopan once again. Lightning tore the clouds apart, revealing rain falling like demonic tentacles dragging us into the abyss. I'd planned for this. I'd prepared for everything. Yet I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Below, the complex turned into a panicked hive as the casual walkers scrambled for high ground. From my height, they looked like ants fleeing a flood while management completely fell apart. Emergency alerts screamed on every phone, and the group chat dissolved into pure, unfiltered rage. They said it was over. Someone wailed, mourning a bag of meat lost in the stampede home. To hell with this, someone screamed. The asphalt hadn't even dried before the sky dumped another ocean on us. Vehicles bobbed like plastic toys as the city surrendered. The drainage crews pulled double shifts for nothing. The heavens just slammed shut again. 60 more seconds of this and the street becomes a damn bay. If it goes all night, the lobby is a goner. Turns out I was lowballing it. The hammer of water didn't let up until 2 in the morning. Curses drifted through the humid air, swallowed by the thunder while the sun stayed hidden. No amount of downpour could mask the raw terror echoing from the ground floor. Even up on 31st, the sound of people losing everything hit me. By now, the bottom level was basically an aquarium. The hallways turned into a mosh pit of panic as families from the lower units scrambled for higher ground. Doors clicked open across the 31st floor as neighbors peeked out. "Get moving," a voice barked. "Check the stairs, make sure everyone is breathing." I usually play the hero, but I couldn't move. Water scares the life out of me. The building survival operation kicked off, and I was just a ghost in my own apartment. People from the penthouse level stepped up, diving into the chaos to grab whatever stayed afloat. Valuables, gear, anything. Residents threw their doors open, turning their living rooms into makeshift shelters for the soaked and shivering families. My phone was blowing up with stories of neighbors becoming brothers. But the national feed told a deadlier story. The whole country was coming apart at the seams. This wasn't just us. Half the nation was currently drowning in the exact same nightmare. The top trend was a chilling forecast. A once-in-a-century deluge was hitting the Mississippi. Major hubs like New York, Chicago, and Miami were on red alert as the water levels climbed. JFK looked like the middle of the Atlantic, and the river was swallowing the city. Even the capital was sinking. The drainage systems shattered, leaving half the city submerged. I was paralyzed. We used to be the lead story. Now we weren't even a footnote. It hit me then. If the economic giants were flatlining, this storm was a god-tier monster. The country's financial backbone was about to snap under the weight of the water. The feds were tapped out. Nobody was coming to save us. My gut twisted with a fear that went way deeper than my usual water phobia. Staring at the breaking news, I flashed back to those prehistoric floods, the ones that lasted for millions of years. This wasn't a weather pattern. Logic was dead. This looked like a mass extinction event. I dove into the darkest corners of the web, hunting for anything that wasn't a sugar-coated lie. I ran the math on the worst-case scenarios. What if this didn't stop, not in a month or 3 or 4? What if the sky stayed open for a whole year? Only one question mattered. How do I survive the fallout? I spent all afternoon digging, but there was no playbook for this. If the rain didn't quit, the only move was to climb. In about 2 weeks, the world as we know it would start to rot. The grid would blow first total darkness. Then the web goes dark, and the water starts carrying the plague. A month into this humidity, and every breath would be a gamble with infection. Every valley and coastal town would be erased from the map. The world was rotting, and I had a front row seat. Mudslides and flash floods would become the new heartbeat of the planet. 2 months in the hunger would start to bite. I could almost see the bodies piling up in the streets. By month 4, the real diseases would start their harvest. 6 months in the silence would be deafening as the forests and fields vanished beneath the waves. After 1 year, dry land would be a myth, saved only for the highest peaks on Earth. It was enough to make my blood run cold. If this lasted a year, what would happen to my folks? I fumbled for my phone, praying the towers were still standing. My dad picked up his voice, sounding 10 years older. "Something is wrong with the world, son. We have got to hit the mountains." He is usually the type to laugh things off, but his panic about heading for the hills told me everything. My heart dropped when he said the village was already gone. 2 days ago, a slide buried half the town, and they were still counting the bodies. I couldn't handle the anxiety. My stomach did a slow roll. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I snapped. "I didn't want you to spiral," he whispered. "How are things on your end?" He knew the answer. He had seen the footage of my neighborhood. The news was showing my district as a total wash. Even with the world ending, he was only worried about his kid. I told him I was safe on the 31st floor and begged him to grab the food and get everyone to high ground. After agreeing, he pleaded with me to reach Mount Punyashan Peak to meet up with them. "Everything is going under." That chilling sentence snapped me out of it. How had I been this blind? Reaching Mount Bunyashan meant finding a bunker. At 6,500 feet, no world-ending flood could touch me. Since it is a tourist destination, paved steps lead right to the summit. With mountainside structures, it's the ultimate hideout. But I am stranded. The world is a lake, and I lack a boat. Plus, I am 31 stories up. At 300 feet, the rain would need months to reach my doorstep. I am safe for now, but I will bolt for that mountain the moment a window opens. I ended the call. I felt hollow, crushed by relentless dread. I forced myself to cook just to stop the gnawing emptiness inside me. I soaked, then crawled into bed, knowing sleep would be a struggle. Noise flooded the hall, but fatigue eventually dragged me under. I woke sweating from a nightmare, gasping in the dark. I listened to the storm's savage fury. It sounded like the heavens were ripping apart as the wind shrieked through. Rain pounded the glass like hammer blows, and suddenly the hallway outside went eerily silent. Strange, but I figured everyone had just passed out. Walking into the living room, I froze. A dark pool had formed on the floor, fed by ceiling drips. Water was also oozing through the window frames. That is the bitter price for a penthouse view during a deluge. With this much rain, a leaking roof was inevitable. Thankfully, the drains were still putting up a fight. It had not gotten deep yet. But the sight alone sent a shiver down my spine. I hauled my stash of food into the bedroom immediately. The living room was already a lost cause. By dawn, the group chat was a war zone. Neighbors were begging for scraps and cursing their flooded luxury units. Desperation and grief were spreading like wildfire. For now, though, people were at least pretending to be helpful. Seeing them play nice felt wrong. A chilling thought suddenly crossed my mind. If this lasts months, what then? Will they stay neighborly? Once the last of the food vanishes, between the damp rot and disease, this tower will become a tomb. A literal hell, and that transition terrifies me. I'm haunted by the thought of human nature's ugly side erupting. I double-checked every lock. I shoved the heavy cabinet and dragged the wardrobe over, barricading the entrance until it was completely sealed. I needed that door to be immovable. My survival depended on it. Behind that heavy steel door, I was alone. It was the only barrier between me and the breakdown outside. Not even a mob could get through this. Anyone trying to breach my unit would have a nightmare trying. This place was always a ghost town anyway. 3 days later, the power finally died. A crowd had swarmed the 31st floor for safety. Meanwhile, the tempest only grew more savage. Emergency alerts were constant and meaningless now. No words could capture the magnitude of this disaster. My landlord went dark, likely underwater themselves. After lunch, blood-curdling screams echoed from the corridor. The bottom floors were history, and the tide was climbing. Please, someone help us. Level 4 is gone. At this rate, the city's high-level command centers were almost certainly deep beneath the waves. Despair drowned the city even faster than the flood. It has not let up since my last supply run. I am huddled in the bedroom, avoiding the flooded main area. The building's drainage finally quit. Soon the water will be coming for my bed. I grabbed my backup battery to check the news. Government agencies were gone. Only frantic social posts remained. The timeline was a chorus of agony. The whole valley is gone. Is anyone left? Yangshan is sinking, help! I searched the chaos, desperate for any sign of a rescue. Headlines said a massive wave leveled the west coast. Our embassies had gone completely dark. My heart sank as the truth hit me. This was not weather. This was the end of the world. 14 days of rain had triggered a global collapse. And the nightmare was just getting started. Even if the sun came out now, millions would already be dead. But the rain kept falling, and the toll would soon explode as starvation and disease took hold. Rot and fever were merely precursors to the true nightmare ahead. Staring into space, I watched the pandemic grow in my mind while my screen stayed hauntingly blank. No signal. My stomach dropped as I realized the world had finally gone dark. Grids down. No bars, no lights. Cut off from the web were just bugs trapped on a sinking rock. Suddenly, a shrill alarm tore through the quiet. Tidal wave. It's actually happening. High-pitched shrieks filled the hall. Everyone on the 31st floor crowded the windows in sheer terror. Their eyes were glued north, where the rugged peaks and deep riverbeds usually dominated the skyline. I knew right then we were done, for a mountain-borne surge was charging straight at us. A liquid mountain roared south, aiming for the skyline. These glass towers were about to get pulverized. Oh God, it's here, we're dead. someone screamed. The torrent smashed into the city center. I couldn't see the crest yet, but the thunderous growl was unmistakable. That sound had haunted us since the collapse, the sickening groan of steel and concrete being shredded. It stalked closer like some prehistoric beast. The sheer power made the very foundation beneath my feet vibrate. Goosebumps prickled my arms as the truth set in. The credits were rolling on our lives. Either this place collapses or we become a vertical aquarium. Either way, there is no way out. The base would crumble, turning my sanctuary into a coffin. Water hits just as hard as a magnitude 9. I lunged for my bedroom through the bolt and scrambled under the mattress like a terrified child. I was trained for tremors, not tsunamis. Instinct just drove me into the tightest space I could find. If the ceiling dropped, maybe the steel frame would keep me from being crushed into a pancake. Every other survival tip vanished. All I had left was a desperate prayer that these pillars would hold. The deluge roared louder while the hallway outside exploded into a frenzy of pounding feet and wailing. "Move it. Get to the roof now. It's our only shot. Move your asses." To the roof go. Hiding here was just waiting for the Reaper. I couldn't just sit and die. I was frozen. "Don't quit, climb." The frantic dash upward meant the water was already swallowing the lower floors. The wave was imminent. That northern surge was matching the carnage already unfolding downtown. This was a biblical deluge, a wall of death poised to drown every square inch of our world. Yuqing was being deleted. My hometown was becoming the seafloor, and I was at the epicenter. This wasn't just a blackout. The tide was literally eating the city's bones. 5 stories gone instantly. Downstairs, people were already breathing water. I gripped the bed knuckles white and trembling. 3 years ago, that icy lake. The trauma flooded back, paralyzing me with cold memories. My psyche snapped. I started seeing things then. A thunderous impact nearly threw me out of my skin. It was like a wrecking ball hit the building. I was launched forward, sliding across the hardwood like a hockey puck. My skull bounced off the drywall. Stars exploded in my vision as the room started spinning. Then the secondary hits started, brutal, rhythmic strikes that felt like the earth was dying. Our tower was just a pier in a hurricane getting pummeled by relentless, crushing liquid walls. The surge was a slurry of toxic sludge and jagged shrapnel from the neighborhoods it had already digested. Worse yet, bodies bobbed in the filth. Those left in the hall were snatched up by the rising tide. The torrent sucked them into the dark. Their flailing limbs were the last things I saw before the chaos took them. Speed was life, and they were failing. A human wave from below was desperately trying to outrun the real one. Time was up. People were kicking indoors, desperately seeking any sanctuary that wasn't already submerged. It's an ocean now. You think a locked door is going to stop a tsunami? Crowds stood no chance against the speed of the surge. The walls screamed as the structural beams began to fail. Chunks of drywall rained down as cracks raced across the ceiling like lightning bolts. The floorboards buckled and snapped. My legs turned to jelly and I just slumped to the ground. I slid down the wall, paralyzed by raw animal fear. Then the smell of wet earth and death filled my lungs. 31 floors up, and the rot still found me. "This is how it ends," I whispered, as the filth invaded my last sanctuary. If the water didn't stop rising, my own bedroom was going to become my tomb. But fate had a sick sense of humor. The massive waves didn't quite breach the perimeter of the room. The main surge had swallowed everything up to the 20th floor, leaving only the dying swells to lick at my heels. I finally exhaled. Then boom, a bone-shaking blast ripped through the foundation. I didn't just hear it. I felt the steel groan in my very marrow. Gravity betrayed me. I began sliding as the entire high-rise leaned toward the dark, watery abyss. There was no mistaking that sound. The flood and its debris had finally snapped the building's structural spine. The current had likely hollowed out the ground beneath the foundation completely. This floor wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a sinking ship. Then a neighbor's shriek cut through the chaos like a jagged knife. "Somebody help me." Her sheer desperation turned my blood to ice and stole my voice. I was paralyzed. Pure, unadulterated terror had woven itself into the very center of my nervous system. Trapped between the rising tide and a collapsing tower, my last shred of composure vanished into thin air. I huddled under the bed as the ceiling groaned with a heavy metallic thud. Concrete was literally shredding itself overhead as the building listed. My luck had run dry. The roof right above my head was about to give way. Plaster shattered and rebar snapped, the sounds of structural failure growing more intense by the second. Adrenaline finally kicked in. I had to move now. If that entire ceiling came down, I'd be buried alive before I could blink. Clenching my shaking hands, I bolted for the exit. I didn't care about the supplies I was leaving behind in the bedroom. Time didn't exist anymore. Every microsecond was a choice between life and death. I had to go. I acted on instinct, grabbing 2 leather cases and dragging them toward the door with every ounce of strength I had left. I cleared the threshold, just as the bedroom ceiling disintegrated into a cloud of dust and absolute ruin. A jagged hole opened to the sky, letting the storm pour inside like a heavy, relentless waterfall. The bed was flattened instantly. Stunned, I hugged the wall, dragging my body away from the wreckage of my life. I offered a silent prayer to the void. Reaching the living room, I saw the ceiling. There was already spider webbing into ruins. Rain mixed with that oily yellow filth, turning my home into a literal floating junkyard. Fortunately, the heavy iron door was still holding firm against the waves leaking through the cracks. Since the main flood hadn't hit the 31st floor yet, I was still breathing. I crawled to the kitchen and slumped against the wall. I was soaked to the bone, my vision was swimming, and the stench of decay was overwhelming. I clutched the 2 cases I'd salvaged, my only lifeline in a world that had gone completely insane. One held food and water, the other was packed with various meds. Then I heard it. Crack. The sound was sharp, cutting right through the deafening low roar of the floodwaters. As the tower tilted further, the ceiling began to rain down. Like a ghost, I pulled my bags away, watching my life vanish. The drywall was fracturing. Every time a chunk of debris fell, I'd scramble like a rat to a new corner. After moving for the 3rd time, half the room caved in, exposing the bleached sky and the relentless gray downpour. It looked like the open mouth of a monster. I didn't even dare to look directly at it. Gasping for air, I turned my gaze toward the balcony, only to witness a scene of absolute soul-crushing horror. The reddish-yellow currents were screaming with a terrifying, violent energy. Houses and trees were being pulverized as the tide surged south. Then I saw it. The building across the way was just gone. It was the oldest block in the complex, and now it was completely erased from the skyline. The structure couldn't take the hit. Looking down, I saw the water had already claimed everything up to level 20. That muddy demon was eating the city of Yuqing alive block by block. Countless lives were being snuffed out, and my mind finally snapped. A 3-year-old memory swelled until it blocked out reality. I was technically breathing, but I felt like I was drowning on dry land. Mortality hit me hard. We are nothing against the Earth's fury. I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't making it out. The nightmare I'd spent years outrunning had finally caught up. There was no more running left for me. The floor kept sloping toward the end. In my final moments, I just prayed my parents were safe. Knowing they were up on Bunyashan away from the rising tide was the only thing keeping me sane. I took a deep breath and looked up through the massive gap in my ceiling. Is this it? You finally done with me? You big empty void. Was I just born to die? But then the air shifted. Something felt off. The sky was not screaming anymore. The monster had finally vanished. I looked closer, but all I saw was a vast, blinding white. Total silence. The world just quit. I blinked hard, waiting for the rain to hit my face, but it did not. Then joy exploded next door. That sound caught fire ripping through the hallways. Every single floor had people who had cheated death. Everyone was screaming the same two words. It stopped. The flood was still a beast, but the sky finally let up. I had already made peace with my grave, but maybe God decided to look my way after all. A tiny spark of hope flickered in my gut, and I forced myself up as the building settled. The shaking stopped. We had survived the worst of it. I braced myself against the wall and limped to the balcony. I needed proof. Above it was dry, but below the 20th floor, the world was still a violent ocean. We made it. We are alive, voices yelled. The 31st floor was packed with people who had outrun the rising water. I had not realized how many remained. I felt a strange, heavy connection to every soul there. Their cheers lit a fire in my chest. I wanted to live, but the rational part knew we were in danger. I had seen this trick before. The rain stops just to catch its breath. That sky was still a bruised gray. It is not over until I reach that mountain. If I find a raft, I will ride the current before it returns. No more hiding. Waiting is just a slow way to die, and I was not about to sit here and rot. I looked toward the horizon, but it was all just a thick fog. The water had wiped the world clean. But my folks were out there. They were safe on a peak that still touched the sky. 2,000 meters of solid rock was my goal. Then a desperate wail hit my door, followed by a heavy thud. Someone was frantic, begging for meds. The hallway was a mess of voices. I have medicine, but my place is underwater. One voice cracked in despair, while another offered up their last cup of rice. We were all trying to stay human, but we were running on empty, and more refugees kept climbing from the depths, hungry and sick. A thick, sharp rot was starting to fill the air. It was the stench of a coming plague. The water was a toxic soup, and the floors below us were nothing but a graveyard for the trapped. I stood by the door, listening to the chaos, and felt a heavy weight of grief. One man against this is nothing. I took a breath and opened the door. I have medicine here. Every eye snapped to me. I clicked open my case, showing rows of meds that the water had not touched. A mother clutching her kid just broke down, sobbing out thanks as she grabbed for the pills. A tall, exhausted guy with a face full of misery stepped up to help. I am a doctor from the hospital. I just gave a short nod. Call me Shaolin, I told him. An old man standing nearby shoved a dirty crust of bread into my palm. My throat went tight. Selfish or not, we were all just clawing for another tomorrow. But we could not do it here. I raised my voice for the hall. We have to leave. The sky is lying. We cannot bet our lives on this. Their faces drained of color. They knew it too deep down, but were just too terrified to admit it. Lian Yu finished treating the kid and looked me square in the eye. He is right. We cannot wait. Shaolin, what is the move? We need a boat. I told them we needed to head southeast while we still could. People looked around, and I saw the first few heads starting to nod in agreement. Others held back. It was 20 kilometers of hell and debris between us and safety. The water had settled for now, but I knew this was just the prologue to a much bigger disaster. If the clouds opened up while we were out there, we were ghosts. If they did not, we might make it. Staying here is suicide, I barked. We had to move. I looked at the cracks spreading across the walls. This place was already leaning into the current. One more foot of water, and the whole concrete skeleton will snap. Lian Yu backed me up, reminding everyone that our cupboards were already bone dry. He broke down our grim reality, and the room went silent as people weighed their lives. Suddenly, a set of twins stepped out, claiming they were professional surfers. We've got a boat, they announced, and we're the ones who can handle it. A spark of hope ignited in the crowd. A guy in glasses pointed north, suggesting we look for vessels carried down from the shipyards. Someone recognized him as Old Mao, a retired shipbuilder, and everyone sprinted toward the windows. They climbed over the jagged frames to scan the wreckage below, until a scream of pure relief broke the air. Look, there's one wedged on the 21st floor. It was a small, beat-up fishing vessel, maybe 10 meters long, but it was still afloat. The hull looked intact, but a single boat wouldn't even dent our numbers. Lian Yu didn't hesitate, immediately taking command. He ordered the women, kids, and seniors to remain on the 131st floor. Able-bodied men with me. Over 10 guys shouted back, ready to descend and patch her up. I ducked into my room to scavenge the last scraps of food and medicine from my luggage. It was just enough to give everyone a real meal. I handed it out, telling them to fuel up fast. The old guy who'd split his bread with me earlier spoke up, warning the group to save portions for the workers below. That repair job is grueling, he reminded them, and everyone silently set aside food for Lian Yu's crew. Soon the echo of clanging metal and desperate shouts drifted up from the 21st level. Taming a boat in a deluge was a nightmare. But the commotion drew more survivors out from the upper stories. Some stepped up to help, while others retreated to their rooms, terrified of the trek to Mount Bunyangshan. The break in the rain gave people a false, fatal sense of security, that the building was still their sanctuary. But I stayed vigilant, watching the water levels for even the slightest shift. The sky had turned a nauseating milky white. Last time the storm took a breather, we only got 24 hours of peace. I wondered how long we had before the heavens broke again. The temperature dropped sharply, leaving the seniors shivering and weak on the cold floor. Clinging to my bag, I felt my way down the dark stairwell toward the 21st floor. Shadows flickered in the gloom as Lian Yu's team struggled with ropes to anchor the fishing boat. The steel hull was a mess of rust, and the engine was shot. But at least it wasn't some flimsy wooden raft. When I handed out the food, they swarmed me, their whispered thanks echoing through the black corridor. Lian Yu inhaled a pack of jerky, and some color finally returned to his face. "We move at sunrise," I whispered, "before the sky collapses." Around me the silhouettes shifted, fueled by a fresh, desperate haste. "Dawn is the plan," Lian Yu rasped. "But this boat is a joke. We have over 30 survivors from the 31st floor alone." That didn't even account for the hundreds of others left, scattered throughout the rest of the tower. More than 30 would kill for a seat to Mount Bunyangshan, even if it meant fighting waves in a motorless hull. I let the danger sink in until Lian Yu offered a grim compromise. "The first wave leaves in the morning. You'll take the women and children," he said, with Abu navigating the way. Between the sick and the elderly, we had 15 in the medical wing alone. Abu the surfer had the gear to prove his credentials. He cut me off, reminding me we'd already watched 5 potential lifelines drift past our reach. The debris floating by was getting bigger now. The smaller boats had been swallowed by the depths long ago. Lacking a better plan, I gave him a final grim warning. But he just waded back into the murky water. "I'm a doctor, remember?" he smirked. "I don't die that easy." Night swallowed the city, leaving me drowning in anxiety. I watched the clouds like a hawk, paralyzed by the fear that the deluge would resume before we escaped. Miraculously, sunrise brought no rain. A single sharp beam of light sliced through the oppressive silence. "The sun," people wailed. Even through the haze, that golden glow was proof that the nightmare had finally paused. Total hysteria broke out as the crowd celebrated what they thought was their salvation. While they cried with relief, Lian Yu watched the horizon. "Looks like we made it, Xiaolin," he said. I couldn't share his joy. My gut screamed that this storm was just catching its breath. The sun felt fake, trapped behind a heavy, suffocating membrane of clouds. I suspected a mountain of vapor still loomed above, making this sunlight nothing more than a cruel anomaly. Lian Yu went quiet, then signaled for us to move. It was time to risk everything for Mount Bunyangshan. "Everyone drop down to the 21st floor," Lian Yu ordered. He was a natural commander, perfecting every single move. Despite his grit, many stayed behind. "The sun's out now," they shouted. "Storm's over. Why risk our necks on that floating pile of junk? We'll wait for the water to drop. I'm not dying today, I'm staying." Shockingly, over half refused to budge. Sunlight was a drug, and they were hooked on hope. Even the builders started wavering. I had no time to coddle their fears. I only cared about the survivors. Lian Yu locked eyes with me. I'm with you, Shaolin. He yelled at the crowd, warning them time was dead, calling for any last volunteers. A mother holding her feverish son stepped up. As a geographer listened to me, she cried, "The rain is coming back." The old baker who shared his bread joined us too. Slowly, 13 people gathered ready to gamble it all on Mount Punyangshan. With the surfers, we hit capacity. I wasn't a saint. I wasn't wasting breath on skeptics. I left food for the stayers, then shoved off with Lian Yu and my camera crew. We hit the balcony at room 2105. One by one, we leaped into the skiff. Those left behind watched with haunted eyes torn between safety and a slow death. Lian Yu, the twins, and the rest 13 souls were finally on the water. The boat was rigged with planks, ropes, and tools to manage any mid-water crisis. The twins used boards as oars. Lian Yu lashed ropes tight, screaming for us to hold on. Beneath us, the flood was a starving beast, roaring with a terrifying raw power. My aquaphobia hit like a physical blow. I huddled in the back, white-knuckling the rope. My body went cold. I couldn't even look at the brown whirlpools below. Nausea ripped through me. Where did my hero complex go? I felt invincible jumping out. But as the boat swayed, I broke. It felt like something huge was hunting us. Was it just my head? Or was something actually lurking in that murky depth? Lian Yu sat by me, checking my pulse. I forced a grin, gasping that we had to move. He didn't waste a breath, just signaled the team with a sharp, piercing shout. He raised his hand and we pushed off. The twins dug their makeshift oars in. They steered us out slowly. Once we cleared the building's edge, we were gone. We left the construction shadow and the current grabbed us. We shot forward like a rocket. A collective scream echoed across the water. We gripped those ropes for dear life. I nearly lost my lunch, eyes clamped shut. The horizon was a liquid grave. Skyscrapers stood like lonely concrete tombstones. Stranded people waved from rooftops, their silent screams begging for a rescue we couldn't give. We were barely floating. The twins were fighting the current, but we hadn't flipped. Yet, Abu stood at the bow, squinting. He roared that the southeast river was our only hope. Everyone was on edge, those with strength left leaning into the makeshift oars. They white-knuckled the ropes, helping the twins spot debris to avoid a fatal crash. Submerged ruins were everywhere. Lian Yu squeezed my shoulder, telling me to breathe. Then we slammed into something hard. The boat tilted as a wave swallowed me whole. I started retching, and Lian Yu lunged, grabbing me. Abu screamed that we were still upright. He told us to hold steady. But the city was a minefield of sunken steel. The boat wouldn't steady. We rocked violently, nearly capsizing a dozen times. Miraculously, the scrapwood held. Shaken but alive, that 20-kilometer gap was finally closing. The distance vanished until after fighting through the southeast rapids, we hit the main flow. The river was gone, replaced by a massive churning sea of liquid mud. Abu yelled that we'd reach Buningshan safely in 30 minutes. 2 hours of hell led here. One final push, then a rumble. Thunder shattered the sky. Lightning ripped through the heavy gray clouds. Darkness fell. Dread pooled as sweat broke. I scanned their faces. The crew paled instantly. Panic flared. They screamed to move faster. Faster now. Was rain returning? This was my nightmare scenario. Nature was reclaiming everything. That thunder signaled a deluge in 30 minutes. We scrambled. The river's pace was turning aggressive beneath our boat. The twins screamed. We hit the current, springing into desperate action. Using planks as oars, I thank God for the surfers on board. Another blast rocked us. The sky collapsed. Rain fell in buckets, no drizzle. It instantly swallowed the boat and our shivering backs. Blinding rain hit. We stalled, but Liang Yu kept us rowing. Don't fear, move. Panic hammered my ribs, nearly choking me out. The surge was coming, a flash flood, a wall of total destruction. The current wasn't the terror. The second wave behind was the monster. I paddled barehanded at the stern, straining every muscle to watch. The sky was bruised gray, mirroring the mud current and relentless rain. Visibility vanished. 10 minutes later, I heard the roar of nature's fury. "It's back!" I screamed. Everyone rode like possessed souls, fueled by terror. Abu pointed ahead. Mount Buningshan was close only 15 minutes away. Spirits lifted. Minutes later, adrenaline kicked in as the boat thrashed. Water vibrations made the hull shudder. The force became impossible to fight. I fought with everything I had to keep our vessel steady. A mud wave tore through mist, staining the world yellow and lunging. This surge would drown a 31st floor, leaving no one alive. Caught, we'd be shredded. Is this it? They saw the nightmare. They froze, strength gone. Leong Yu paled, screaming for us to row. Few rowed against the inevitable. The twins looked ready to break. They snapped back, pouring their final energy into the makeshift oars. Old trauma surfaced. This flood was coming for me just like Ollie. They followed me. I had to hold it together despite dying inside. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Row faster, I bellowed. The delay gave us a 10% chance. Trust me, we'll make it. Do you understand? I was really just trying to convince myself. 5 minutes left. Likely doomed. Memories of escaping the cold flashed. During the Lopez Obrador era, I faced death before. I survived then. Why stop believing I refuse to be trapped in this nightmare? Row, don't quit, trust me. I had to lead the charge. The roar deafened us as massive waves obliterated the entire horizon. It flattened buildings surging closer. The boat slowed as tremors intensified. The vibration was overwhelming. We didn't even have 5 minutes left. 10 minutes wouldn't be enough. The twins' faces showed pure despair. They knew. Then Leong Yu shrieked, "Look, a big boat ahead!" A 30-meter fishing trawler was ahead, fighting the ferocious current. Steel blades sliced the surge while I fought for oxygen. I wondered if my brain was short-circuiting right before the end. Where did that trawler come from? It fought the current with raw power, and then I saw her. It was Xiaoli, an old-timer, gripped a heavy chain at the front, his shadow blurred by the howling gale. My legs turned to jelly as I lunged for our railing. I was running on fumes. A dozen guys were howling, "Move it, get the net out. Haul them in hard to port." That wall of water behind us was a death sentence, and they frantically cast the mesh. The ropes tangled around us, and I shrieked at the crew to white-knuckle it. Leong Yu looked half dead and half saved as they dragged us onto the deck. We hit full throttle the second we were aboard. We flew with the current. The thunderous downpour sounded like the world was tearing itself apart at the seams. The skipper bellowed, "Heads up, Bunengshan is coming, everybody overboard." The peak grew massive in the mist. We had seconds to hit that ledge before we were crushed. It topped 2,000 meters, but the bottom had vanished. They had rigged the old tram to work by hand, since the rising tide swallowed the lower half. A mob gathered on a rocky shelf, their voices drowned by the roar as they signaled our pilot. Our hull slammed into the granite with a bone-jarring thud. A massive steel crate lowered on greasy links big enough for 10. My crew started jumping like their lives depended on it. Thinking was a luxury. "Don't tip the damn thing," someone barked from above as the lift began to rise. The people on the ridge were pulling like demons. They gave every ounce of strength to hoist us up. Glancing north, I saw that titan of a wave. It was right on top of us, maybe 10,000 meters out. The stench of rot scorched my throat as we hit the dirt. The lift plummeted back down instantly. The next pack scrambled on, screaming. The ground groaned as the crowd shouted, "Move it faster." The wall was maybe 3,000 meters away. Death's cold shadow touched me as I grabbed the iron links to pull. Leong Yu was white-knuckling the kid on the platform. Every soul on that slope was straining against the weight. We hauled as one, our bodies on the verge of snapping. Even the massive mountain seemed to tremble under the pressure. The surge pulverized the mountain's base, erasing every boat in its path. The abyss took everything. In a heartbeat, 100 meters of the trail simply ceased to exist. Choking for breath, I peered at the gray sky. Leong Yu stood nearby, wiping grime from his face. He glanced at the wreckage below, then at me. After a silent beat, he let out a jagged laugh. I thought we were toasted. I lost it too, laughing like a madman. I shoved his shoulder. "So you are actually human after all?" After walking through the fire, we finally hit the safety of the ridge 1,000 meters up. The water plateaued at 100 meters. So we were dry, but the monsoon would not quit. People were hacking their lungs out in the dark. My old man guided us toward a hollow in the rock to find cover. The air was thick and cold, but a small flame flickered where my mom was waiting. She collapsed into me, sobbing, and I finally broke. "Dry your eyes," I told them. We had food and a roof, even if the medicine cabinet was empty. Dad warned us to stay warm. Sickness was the real killer now. Hundreds of us were packed like sardines on that rock. We had enough to eat, but the lack of antibiotics was a ticking time bomb. Things eventually leveled out. If we stayed healthy, we would survive the heights of Buningshan. But the horizon told a different story. I stared out at a world made of water and floating ghosts. It was a literal graveyard. It could not get worse. The sky cleared for 3 days, but it was a cruel joke. There was nothing to salvage under the deep. We just tidied the cave, burying the fever-stricken and taking what they did not need. Hunger was not the issue. We had bags of grain stacked in the back. The floor was carpeted in produce with salted meat hanging like macabre decorations. I had to hand it to those locals. They had hauled an entire civilization up that mountain. 3 months in the trees turned to skeletons. Then the sky stayed dry for an entire week. We thought we had won. Then the clouds burst again. 6 months and the deluge still held us captive. But the drops were softer now. The distant horizon showed a sliver of blue, and for the first time I felt like I could breathe. A wild hope flickered. The world might be turning a corner. I never dreamed the deluge would cease. But this thinning rain was a variable we hadn't dared imagine. Yu bolted outside, drenching himself in seconds, just to confirm the sky's grip was finally breaking. 8 months in the raw had died to a drizzle mimicking a soft March morning. By day, the sun finally clawed through the haze. Down at the base of Mount Buningshan, the rising tide had finally hit its ceiling. Dad scouted the ridge and returned with a rare grin, announcing the water was finally drawing back. Hope sparked in our chests. By the 10th month, the sky only leaked for a few hours and the flood levels were plummeting. The water had dropped 300 meters, sending us all racing toward the mountain's highest peak. We scrambled up just to catch a glimpse of Yuqing, and finally we saw it. The city's decaying rooftops were finally tasting the sun. Those of us who'd fled together just broke, falling into each other's arms and sobbing. Then silence. The rain vanished as sunlight shattered the thick fog bathing the peak of Mount Banyanshan and burning against our faces. Every survivor screamed at the heavens, welcoming the light we'd spent an eternity mourning. I broke down thinking of the students we'd buried in the mud. As Yuqing's skyline rose from the deep, something appeared on the horizon. Small black dots sharpened into silhouettes, military helicopters. Every soul on that ridge began thrashing their arms toward the clouds. They were howling like children in the dawn. I was caught in a jagged mess of laughter and sobbing. I saw the mother clutching her girl, the limping geologist and Amao. Then the twins dancing hand in hand. It was raw, pure heart. They looked like total fools, but honestly, it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever witnessed.